I'm not a crook.
Mike in Atlanta, you're next on the EIB network. Hello, sir. Nice to have you with us.
How you doing?
Just fine, sir.
Listen, I'm a General Motors retiree union worker, and first of all, let me say that I don't agree with UAW's politics. I've voted Republican ever since Reagan, so I don't agree with their politics, but I am a UAW retiree, so I'd like to give you just a little bit of perspective of this, what's called the, I guess, union bailout.
Let me ask you a couple of questions. How old are you now, if you don't mind my asking, if you don't have to answer if you don't want to?
I'll be 57 my next birthday.
You'll be 57 your next birthday. And how long have you been retired?
About 2.5 years.
Okay, so you could retire at 55.
Yeah, I retired at 55, right?
Okay, all right. So you're 55, you basically retired 2 years ago, and go ahead now, make your enlighten us, your perspective.
Okay. In 2006, the union took a lot of concessions. I don't know if people are aware of it. I never hear anybody talking about it. As of 2006, General Motors stopped the pension plan, so anybody coming in after 2006 won't get a pension. They severely cut the starting pay, I think, down to about $15 an hour, something like that. So when you hire in with General Motors, you don't hire in at, this big salary that everybody seems to think that you do. I've heard people talk about it. You make $40 an hour for turning a wrench on an assembly line, stuff like that. But that's just not the case. That's not the way it is. When I retired back in 2005, I think it was about $25 an hour I retired at. So, but right now when I hear them talking about cutting the pension.
Okay, I'm going to take a break here. But I'm glad you, Mike. I'm glad that you're offering this perspective. I want to ask you to give you some time to think about it here during the break. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that starting out now pays much less than it used to with General Motors? We'll be back after this. Don't go away. But I want you to tell me why you think entry hourly wages are much less than they used to be today at General Motors after all these union contracts. How the hell did this happen?
Well, the reason they're not paying as much is because they're not making the money like they were. Like I said, people have just for some reason stopped. Lost confidence in General Motors for some reason and just stopped buying our cars. But if they're not making the money, they just can't pay the wage. That's just the way I see that. So.
Well, now wait a minute. But maybe I misunderstood, but I thought you were being critical when you made the statement that General Motors no longer pays what it did, but they can't pay the wage for whatever reason.
Well, no, I'm saying in 2006 because things were getting tough. When the UAW and General Motors negotiated the contract, the UAW agreed to take concessions, and one of the things they agreed to do was hire people in at a lot less. And like I said, there is no more pensions. If you come to General Motors after 2006, you don't get a pension. They're totally done away with. And
well,
a lot of
let me tell you something though about that. I've never had a job where I had a pension. I've never had a job. Now I'm a member of AFTRA. But I don't even use the health care that comes along with it. I don't want to mess with it. I'm sure there's some sort of a pension there, but I mean, other than a union, a union job. I've never had a job where somebody promised me. Like I worked for the Kansas City Royals for 5 years,
right?
And the most I made was $17,000 a year. I didn't get there was no talk of pension that they paid.
Well,
that was all strange to me.
General Motors, that is part of it. They agreed that when 30 years ago when I went to work with General Motors and they had like 50% of the job market and all and things were, going along real fine, that was one of the things that you really counted on, that when you work for a company, you put 30 years in with them, they guaranteed you a pension. But let me say that, the pensions aren't that much. I mean, people seem to think that if you think that we're making these huge pensions, it's
no,
not.
They're not. But Social Security's not that much on a monthly basis per individual, but by the time you add up how much each individual gets times the tens of millions that are receiving Social Security, it costs a lot of people a lot of money to pay it. And it's the same thing with any entity as large as General Motors that has that. Let me ask you this before we go. I'm going to put you in management now. You're no longer on the line. You're in management, and you're making General Motors cars. And one of the business realities that you face is that you have to add in $2,600 per car on average that you make to the sale price to cover the pensions and the health care and the sick days and the holiday pay and the line relief and all that. And your competitor, Toyota or anybody else, only has to pay $200 per car for health care. What would you do?
Well, I mean, I understand what you're trying to say. I understand that point. But, General Motors... No.
I'm not trying to say anything. I'm genuinely asking you. I'm putting... If you can do it, if you can put your management cap on, I'm not asking you to be sympathetic. I'm not asking you to be sympathetic with them. I'm not doing anything. I really want to know what you would do, and it may not be fair. I don't know how much management experience that you have, and I don't know what your overall impression of management in any business is. I know that most employees suspect management of not being honest and forthcoming about costs and this sort of thing. So I don't know what biases you have, but if you can do it, if you were running, let's take you out of car business, and let's say that you're in the pizza business, and your pizzas cost, let's say, $7 more than the guy down the street from you because your pizza has to cover his pension, welfare, all these things, and the competitors doesn't. What would you do?
I really can't say what I do there. All I know is, like I was trying to say, just trying to get the perspective from a person that, is basically living on a pension now. I did have to go back to work to supplement my pension because it's not that much. And, when I hear things like, well, let's just, cut out General Motors pension, stuff like that, there's a lot of people like myself probably now that are hearing this are saying, well, yeah, what am I supposed to do if they just cut out my pension, and I've worked at General Motors for 30 years, and all of a sudden they're going to just do away with my pension. What am I supposed to go back to work when I'm 60, 70 years old? So it just really puts us in a bad...
No, but since you asked, you're a nice guy, and I'm sure that you are a salt-of-the-earth guy, but since you asked, what am I supposed to do, go back to work when I'm 67? No, you're not supposed to retire when you're 55. You sound to me like you are totally capable of still working. Unless you work for a place that forces you out and says 55, you can no longer do the job, you got no business retiring at 55 if you can't afford to retire. What's wrong, Snurdly? My boss is having a conniption in there. What's wrong? What is wrong? Is that an impolitic thing to say? I have not the American dream. I have not redefined the American dream. The American dream retire at 65. People are retiring now at 50 and 55 and so forth when they're still capable of working. Okay, so you retire at 50 or 55 and you've got, according to the tables, you've got 20, at 55, you've got 22 years left. Now, who's going to, there is a thing called the cost of living. And if your pension does not pay you what you're going to need to live in the style to which you become accustomed for 27 more years or 22 more years, then you're going to have to supplement it somehow. I have not redefined the American dream. I have not redefined it. And does anybody really, I don't even want to go there. Social Security is what it is, and it's what it's not. And it's more not than it is. But most people cannot live with nothing else other than Social Security in the style to which they were accustomed when they retire. Now, there are caveats here. Of course, you might work in a job where the boss forces you out at 55. They made Cronkite retire at 65, and he theoretically could have anchored that for 20 more years, and we would have been spared Dan Rather. The only reason Rather got the gig was CBS had this antiquated retirement age policy of 65. I don't have it anymore because Rather's in his 70s now, and they did away with it. But the answers keep working. There's no crime in that, especially if you need the money. If you need the money, you keep working. If you have a job, just don't quit. I don't understand what I said that's wrong here. I just don't. How are you? Hal Rushball back, serving humanity, as always, simply by showing up Ladies and gentlemen, I need to address something here. I meant to do this at the beginning of the program, and I was so excited to get back and had so many things to talk about that it slipped my mind until just now. Last Thursday, I was out on a golf course with the reprobate golf buddies.